Sustained gunshots were heard yesterday near the presidential palace in Bissau, the capital city of Guinea-Bissau, with at least one person said to have been killed amid fears of a coup attempt. Soldiers have reportedly detained the president and his ministers, and West African regional leaders have condemned what they call a coup attempt and urged troops to return to barracks. Soldiers are said to have surrounded the building where President Umaru Sissoco Embalo was reportedly attending a cabinet meeting. State television was reportedly off-air, and there was no immediate official statement on the situation, which can be described as complicated. Since independence from Portugal in 1974, Guinea-Bissau has suffered a series of coups, military revolts, and political assassinations. If successful, the coup in Guinea-Bissau will be the fourth in the West African region in the past 19 months. The economic community of West African states condemns what it calls an attempted coup in Guinea-Bissau and is urging the military to return to its barracks. It follows reports of men in civilian clothing opening fire close to a government building where a meeting between the president and prime minister of Guinea-Bissau was being held. The whereabouts of the prime minister remain unknown. ECOWAS recently suspended another of its members, Burkina Faso, where the military took over government. However, amidst the growing trend of military coups in Africa, President Muhammadu Buhari is assuring Nigerians that the era of military takeover is gone for good. Responding to concerns raised by the Ekiti State Governor, Kayode Fayemi, on the recent resurgence of military takeovers in Mali, Guinea, and Burkina Faso, Buhari says he strongly believes that, in quotes, Nigeria has passed through that stage. He assured Nigerians that his administration will finish strong in the last lap of his tenure.
A lot of us in this room are very concerned about what is appearing to be a domino of coups in our sub-region. We've had Mali, we have had Chad, we've had Central African Republic, it's come down to Guinea, and now Burkina Faso. And we believe that Nigeria has its manifest destiny to protect democracy, not just in Nigeria, but also in our region. But in doing that, we must also ensure that our politicians adhere strictly to constitutional principles.
Well, do you want to start or shall I?
Oh, go ahead, go ahead.
President Embalo has posted on his Facebook page that calm has been restored. So that's good news. The president seems to have taken over the situation, and it can rightly now be described as a coup attempt, not a successful coup. So far, fingers crossed, but let's not hold our breath, because this does seem to be a trend, as you were saying, right at the top of the show this morning. It's quite a disturbing trend in the past 18 months. So many coups and coup attempts in quick succession. The situation in Guinea-Bissau is being attributed to drug traffickers at the moment, because you'll know that it was Africa's first narco state. So it's described, because it was such a transition point for the drug trade from Latin American countries. But there are other issues. What tends to happen, as we all know, as we've seen in our history in Nigeria, which according to President Muhammadu Buhari will never repeat itself, that the seeming corruption, inefficiencies of democratically elected government make it almost irresistible. The soldiers do feel compelled to take over, and that is what has happened. And also there's been security situations across the Sahel that is also making the problem, a coup's an attractive proposition now, after so many years of hard-won democracy. And it's just a really stark reminder that all systems that are created must be sustained. We cannot be complacent about our democracy. So even little things, or seemingly little things, like election amendments of this section or this clause, it's all crucially important to maintain the democracy that was so hard won. And we can never rest on our laurels and assume that Nigeria is somehow immune from the challenges that our neighbors are facing. And on the issue of the international bodies or regional bodies, ECOWAS and the AU what do? Strong condemnations, sanctions. That appears to have little to no effect, quite frankly. It doesn't act as a deterrent at all. If it did, this trend would have been stopped in its tracks. It only seems to be continuing. So I do think ECOWAS and AU really need to do some introspection as to why they're completely ineffective right now. It's embarrassing, actually, because look at Guinea-Bissau. After how many, like a whole decade, several years of sanctions, this has still happened. So what then is the point of your sanctions? So we do need to find strategies to prevent these coups from happening, to remove, it does seem attractive to certain people. Why? And that needs to be addressed so that we do not continue to have this, because it is extremely worrying. I'm thinking of President Truman now, the domino effect. I do worry because you can never think that you are somehow exempt from what's going on around you.
Okay, I think it's a major setback for democratic consolidation in Africa, not just the Sahel region in West Africa, but the whole of Africa. Because you recall that in the 80s, 70s and early 80s, there was this idea of the strong man as the best for the development process in Africa. And that was the argument that was used to justify military rule and militarization in Africa. But by the 90s, we had this wave of democratization, which was in itself, a response to what had become the international trend and the rise of the emphasis on the power of the people as a dominant ethos in political processes. But now, about 2-3 decades down the line, you'll find Africa, going back to the past. And it's so unfortunate coming at a time when these African countries should be talking about democratic consolidation. 5 different coups in a period of 18 months, 4 succeeded. The one in Guinea-Bissau has failed. And you're right. The president, has said that the situation is under control. And he was even expressing the hope that, the coupists, the attempted coupists, should have consulted him. Because he knows that what the issue is because of policies that he has introduced to deal with illicit drug trafficking and also corruption in the country. But the truth of the matter is that, look, since about a year ago, since the election of 2020, which, Embalo, 49-year-old retired Army General Embalo won, the opposition, the PAIG, had always been on his neck, and there's been that tension. In fact, last year, there were speculations that, soldiers were being given money to stage a coup. But that, of course, did not happen. And so yesterday, they made this attempt that has now failed. And, the basic explanation here is that Guinea-Bissau has been a very unfortunate country since it gained independence in 1974. Between 1974 and now and yesterday, there were 4 coups. The last one was in 2012. And now, in 2014, the country decided to return to civilian rule, to democratic rule. Embalo became president, just as I said, just last year. But that tension had not disappeared. And the people who suffer are the ordinary people of Guinea-Bissau. Many of them had to flee yesterday. Markets had to be shut down, even despite the fact that President Embalo says the situation is under control. That tension is still there. Now, the other issue we need to worry about, which you raise, is the intervention of the international community. Yes, by yesterday, the AU, the ECOWAS, even the United Nations had condemned the coup attempt, and that is obvious. Now, as it did in Mali and also in Burkina Faso, you can expect that if the coup had succeeded, the AU or the ECOWAS will have imposed their sanctions and will have said this is unacceptable. But why is it that those sanctions do not work? And why is it that, say, in Mali, for example, Mali says, well, ECOWAS can go to hell. They don't care. Now, the truth of the matter is that, one, we have the Constitutive Act of the African Union, for example. Under the Constitutive Acts of both African Union and ECOWAS, coup is unacceptable. But at a point, AU came up with what they call the African Peer Review Mechanism. This African Peer Review Mechanism process is supposed to play some kind of oversight role, and to make sure that these African countries stay on track. But the African Peer Review Mechanism has not really worked. It has not really served its purpose. Now, in terms of trend, what do we observe? Usually before these coups take place, you see that one, there are issues about governance in the country. Before the coup in Burkina Faso, the people were protesting, and then the military took advantage of the situation. Mali has not known peace for more than 2 decades now. You know, 2 coups in their own case within a period of 10 years. And then this third one that saw Assimi Goïta taking over power in that country. So, but poor governance is part of the problem. Election issues will also be part of the problem. And that's why we say ensuring a very credible electoral process in Africa, in our countries, you know, is important. Otherwise, once there is very contentious, electoral process, the seeds of conflict, are sown, and the divisions within the country could translate into this kind of conflict. The third issue, of course, is corruption. And then finally, of course, the fear that is expressed by many people is that, will this trend continue? Are we going to wake up tomorrow and then find, that another country has also fallen? In Burkina Faso, the man who took power there has declared himself now head of state. He has tried to legitimize himself. And it's not a trend, that can be allowed to continue, whether it's in Burkina Faso or in Mali or in Sudan or in Chad or in any part of Africa, because the brunt of it is felt ultimately by the people.
That's really the bottom line. That's all on the news headlines. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll have Rota Sadiri, Michael Wilson, Adeswa Moran, and Aaron Akerjala to give us updates on Africa and global business, COVID-19, and sporting activities across the globe. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Morning Show here on Arise News. Before we begin with our global business update with Mr. Wilson, here's an update on Guinea-Bissau's attempted coup. As we said earlier, President Umaru Sissoco Embalo says all is now under control after what he describes as a failed attack against democracy, in quotes, in Guinea-Bissau. Assailants armed with machine guns attacked the country's government palace for hours yesterday, while the president and cabinet ministers were attending a meeting. It is not immediately clear who is behind the assault.
At the preview of the Council of Ministers, I could never have imagined that the President of the Republic, the Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, the Prime Minister and all other members of the government, were surprised by gunfire from heavy artillery, machine guns and AK-47s. The shooting lasted 5 hours in order to rescue the Supreme Commander. This way, unintelligible, the people in general remained calm, while our Republican defense and security forces managed to stop this evil, an axis of evil that wanted to make an attempt against the democratic. Guinea-Bissau is in mourning. It has brave sons of Guinea who have fallen, unintelligible, only, for, the ambition of 2 or 3 people who share the evil, in a country that has the right to live in peace. Our defense and security forces are to be congratulated. In fact, it was a very well-prepared and organized act, and the military, unintelligible, on it, and also have connivance and have to do with our fight against drug trafficking. There are dead, but I don't know, because the president was between fire and iron for 5 hours, and I couldn't imagine how many, but there are dead, there are many dead, it's true, on one side and on the other.
Now for Global Business Update, Michael Wilson joins us from London. Good morning, Mr. Wilson.
Good morning. Most things closed because of the Lunar Day holiday today, but what was open was up. That's the basic bottom line. So Japan up about 1.8%. After yesterday's moves as far as Australia is concerned, the central bank governor there was absolutely decided to reiterate his comments that they're not expecting an interest rate rise immediately, even though they've withdrawn their bond buying back. So there you have a central bank slightly tightening, but not too much, and very keen to make sure that they're not joining the general wave of where it's going. Of course, the UK Bank of England, we get that decision tomorrow. As far as the United States is concerned, then let's go towards that. Nasdaq Futures up again. tech stocks up. I'll come on to Alphabet in a moment. Starbucks down slightly, PayPal down as well on revenue coming in. Earnings season continues today with Meta Platforms, that's what we used to call Facebook, and Qualcomm and DR Horton and T-Mobile. Also, those earnings coming today. So it'll give us further idea of where the US economy is actually going. So many economists are actually now looking, or at least they were yesterday, at where they think the US is going. And they feel as though that the advance so far has been helped by money which is now pandemic relief funds and all the rest of it, which is now going out of the economy, declining help from fiscal and monetary policy, as they put it. So they feel as though there's going to be a big slowdown. Now, that actually contrasts with what the Fed are trying to do, because the most recent view about the Fed is that there's going to be 3 or 4 interest rates at least this year. But whether they would do that with the economy slowing, I don't know. I suspect that's probably why they're hedging their bets at the moment. So on to Alphabet then, which owns Google, the Google owner. Huge, big fourth quarter profits, beat completely expectations there. And therefore the shares were completely up. And really, those results a year show, well, head really a year of complete outperformance by the company. It's beat everything: advertising, revenue up, retail, media and finance and the rest of it. Now, as we were talking yesterday, so was the India budget, the finance minister talking there. And I thought it would be worthwhile just returning to what might and might not have been achieved. That we're talking about Asia's third largest economy. It's suffered hugely because of the pandemic, but they are predicting growth in that budget of 8.5% this year, which would make it one of the fastest growing economies in the world. There was a lot of criticism about a 2-speed recovery in the country, as there is in most developing countries. And the finance minister and the prime minister have said that what they're going to do is help small businesses and try to iron out some of these differences as India hopes to recover from what it suffered under the pandemic. But an 8.5% forecast for growth is huge. Let's keep going with what's happening globally. And more from President Putin. Says the West has ignored Russia's security concerns over NATO and Ukraine. He was talking to the Hungarian Prime Minister yesterday, Viktor Orban, who's long been an outspoken ally of Russia, and we'll see our Prime Minister Johnson hopes to be talking to them fairly soon. As far as the EU is concerned, let's shift our attention from Russia to the European Union, and what they're trying to do is outflank China by outlining an increase in its tech standards. In other words, if people want to do business with the EU, and they're particularly tech companies, we're talking about battery power, facial recognition, and all the rest of it really, right down to 5G. What will the EU actually ask? And what they're trying to do is put a bit of a halt to China's Belt and Road Initiative, which they feel, as particularly as their lobbying organisations are trying to get business in the EU is now standing up for itself as far as tech standards are concerned. We'll hear more about that today. Let's move our attention to the United Kingdom. I told you about activist investors here. Cevian Capital is the latest, going for Vodafone. I did also talk about Nelson Peltz, his Trian partners, which are looking at Unilever. They're also looking at the breakup of one of the energy companies, SSE here, and also the house builder Taylor Wimpey. So basically what's happening is that lots of companies are now, lots of investors, activist investors, are actually looking at what they think are quite cheap corporates in the United Kingdom and trying to get them to change, break up, obviously just to the benefit of the private equity companies so far, but moves are definitely afoot. As far as Amazon is concerned in this country, they've added now 25,000 workers to handle what they consider to be the post-COVID boom. The reason that that's important is that most other British-based retailers, including Tesco, for example, which announced the supermarket chain, which announced 1,000 job losses yesterday because of increased wage costs, are going the other way. So Amazon is hiring and also offering sign-on bonuses and wages slightly above the national average. As far as shopping is concerned in this country, shop prices, according to the British Retail Consortium, which is one of the retail bodies, as its name suggests here, doubled. Prices doubled in January. That's quite extraordinary, isn't it? Because that means that big inflation pressures are heading our way from shopping shelves as well. And finally, oil continuing its climb to a 7-year high. We're going to hear from OPEC Plus later today as to what they're going to do about it. Brent crude up now to $89 a barrel, have it at the latest, and WTI up to 88. That is the global view this morning.
Well, Mr. Wilson, let's start with OPEC. OPEC is meeting today. Goldman Sachs is predicting that OPEC is likely to do something about its production output. Maybe, hike it up, particularly because there is tightening of supply and, the consumers, the buyers are likely to start complaining because of the rise in prices, which is speculated to hit up to about $100 per barrel later in the year, and even as high as over $100 in the early part of next year. Now, what are the odds? What do you think that OPEC is likely to do? And should OPEC decide, for example, to hike production output above 400,000 barrels per day, is there any guarantee that many of his members will be able to meet their own quota?
All right, let's just be clear what we're talking about here. So OPEC Plus increase on a monthly basis by 400,000 barrels a day. So It's a very, very small increase. All right, let's just be absolutely clear about that. Right, so therefore, what will OPEC actually do? I have no idea. But what I think they will be very cautious of is, see, $100 a barrel, as I keep saying, sounds good for oil producers. Actually, what it does is, as we know, as we've often observed on this program before, it increases the pull and increases the leverage of US shale, for example, which could make the US, well, it is the largest producer of oil in the world. Shale would actually add to that too. So it's not all mixed blessings. I'm not sure what OPEC is going to say. All I do know is I suspect what they'll continue to do is have this ability, which they will state, I'm sure, later this afternoon, to say, if they do nothing or they do a little, it doesn't really matter what it is. We reserve the right to call a meeting when we decide that we need to do. So it's not just a monthly thing. In other words, what they're saying is they're keeping a very, very close eye on things. I do feel as though, who knows? We look as though that $100 a barrel target looks set fair, doesn't it, really, for slightly later in the year, maybe even next week. Who knows? It depends really on a lot of geopolitical factors at the moment. But the one truth about it is, and you put your finger on it exactly, if consumers start to complain and start to really complain, then OPEC Plus and all the oil producers have to take notice, because all it does, it speeds the introduction of greener technologies, which come again right up against the fossil fuel projection.
Well, you talked about India earlier on. When the finance minister spoke yesterday, one other major development is India now joining those other countries that would like to introduce digital currency, the digital rupee, the finance minister was saying yesterday. But the point there is that she also talked about a 30% tax rate on digital assets. And, that has caused some excitement, particularly among persons promoting cryptocurrency. What's the connection? And it's
I assume that the connection is the obvious one.
Well,
what I assume
is the 30% tax rate not too high?
What's too high? It's what can be afforded. I think what she's trying to do is to enter into this levelling out policy that India clearly wants to achieve. Yes, it had those huge growth figures. Yes, it is working towards your digital rupee, which will actually show the government where the money is being spent. I feel that that's what they're doing. As far as raising taxes are concerned, she obviously feels as though that sector can afford it. It's levelling up, and it's hoping that they actually will get to those 8.5% growth forecasts at the same time as those 8.5% growth forecasts are going. It needs to be not for one part of the economy, but for all parts of the economy. So what she's trying to do, in tandem with the Prime Minister, is level out the economies. So it will be that rate is quite high, but it won't apply to, for example, farmers who presumably don't have any digital assets.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael Wilson.
Our dependable Rosa Sadiri is here to give us an African business update. Good morning, Rosa.
Good morning, Tundu. Doctor, Viewers, we kick off with very quickly, Timi Silva, Minister of State for Petroleum Resources. He was on NTA. He was asked about when the refineries will be completed. Let's listen to what he had to say.
The next administration. But we agreed that there are milestones. I mean, this year, we expected. We agreed from the very beginning, the completion date will overflow into the next administration. But we agreed that there are milestones. I mean, this year, we expected at the end of this year, especially in Port Harcourt, to achieve at least 60% of the nameplate capacity production from Port Harcourt refinery. We are hoping that by end of next year, the rehabilitation will be completed. Of course, Warri and Kaduna started after Port Harcourt refinery, so it is it's going to progress at a slower pace. But I believe that at the end of this administration, at least all the refineries, Port Harcourt, Kaduna, and Warri will be operating at a certain nameplate capacity. I cannot tell you immediately exactly what the nameplate capacity it will be operating on by the time we leave here, but they will all be at least partially functional. And we're expecting that since governance is a continuum.
Governance is a continuum, and they're expected that they will continue the rehabilitation. Interesting point there. Also, here he is on which is on the front page of today's This Day newspaper. He's asked about fuel consumption. We don't seem to know what our numbers are, but he called them crazy. Here's Mr. Silva on fuel consumption numbers in Nigeria.
Speak about it because I thought this supports my position completely. I think we should just fast track this. I mean, we are all agreed that it is opaque. I mean, I will be the first to agree. Because, I mean, when I first came in on as minister, our daily consumption was around, at that time, 66 million liters per day, according to figures that I got. Then later, it dropped to about 60 million with some effort at controlling some of the smuggling. And then, something dramatic happened. When we had those deregulation discussions and the price moved up to 162 from 145 where I met it, we realized that the consumption dropped to less than 50 million, maybe in the 40 millions or so, 40 millions. So later on, once the exchange rate also now moved up a little bit and swallowed the gains we made from the 162 move, the figures increased again. And sometimes, I mean, the figures you hear are crazy. I mean, when they tell you 90 million liters a day, I mean, they're crazy figures. So, I mean, so for me, what is the sum total of all this? Interrogating numbers, interrogating figures, we've been interrogating these numbers for 20 years. I mean, Prof has been part of the whole process. I mean, from the very beginning, she has been on this side, she has been on the other side. She knows. So why are we continuing to interrogate these figures? Because we all know that there's a problem here. It's opaque. The opportunity, the premium is not coming to government. It's not going to the poor people. It is going to a select people who are feeding fat from this thing.
Exactly.
So why don't we just get rid of this thing?
It's a good question, eh? Why don't we just get rid of this thing? But he's the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources. You were talking about taxes just a minute ago with Michael Wilson on India, that 30% tax or crypto. Yeah. Tax. Vice President Osibanjo was he was speaking at a lecture, Chartered Institute of Taxation. They are celebrating their 40th anniversary. I think it was represented by Aliyu Ahmed, Permanent Secretary of Federal Ministry of Budget and National Planning. He said he was lamenting the low tax to GDP ratio in Nigeria, saying it's at 8%. So Minister Silva is lamenting about fuel subsidy, VP Osibanjo is lamenting about low tax to GDP, and yet no one seems to do anything. Now, on taxes, remember yesterday I was talking about Kenya, and the lesson we can learn from the fact that Kenya has a fuel levy on consumption. So there's a tax on how much on purchasing petrol, which serves as a buffer to protect from rising fuel prices. And this is specifically what I was talking about yesterday. But Doctor, I came with some numbers for you since you were very passionate about not comparing Kenya and Nigeria. Just a few metrics just to throw out there generally about Nigeria. Look at annual GDP growth between Nigeria and Kenya. 2 recessions. Nigeria is in the blue bar. Kenya is in the orange. Now, Kenya has averaged about 4% GDP growth over the last 10 years. You can see both countries in 2010 at 8%. And then from 2013, 2014, Nigeria far outpaced Kenya in GDP growth, over 6%. But look at the orange bar now. I mean, Kenya has only suffered 1 recession in 10 years, 0.3%, and that was when the COVID pandemic hit. Meanwhile, Nigeria suffered too. We can look at a line graph. The line graph, you take a look at the next image, they are more illustrative. Look at that. Both orange in Kenya, blue Nigeria. Kenya, by the way, population of what? 53, 54 million, GDP of 98 billion. Nigeria, population of, again, data issues, 200 million, GDP of 423 billion. Yet, you're looking at it. GDP per capita, let's look at per capita GDP from the World Bank for both countries. Nigeria is almost double Kenya, peaking 2013, 2014, 2015. Until today, per capita GDP as of 2020 for Nigeria, $2,000. Kenya still is not there, but look at the orange bar from left to right. Kenya's per capita GDP has grown consistently. I mean, it's kind of layered off in 2020 as a result of the pandemic. Look at another line graph, which gives it's a more stark illustration. Look at that. You can see the big gap between Nigeria in blue and Kenya in orange, but look at how it has narrowed. Per capita GDP in Kenya has consistently grown. Finally, this one, you only need one chart for this inflation. I talked about this yesterday and how that fuel levy has cushioned inflation on fuel prices for the average Kenyan. In orange is Kenya there, average of about 5% for 2021. Look at Nigeria in blue at double digits. So yeah, there you have it.
Oh dear.
Oh dear,
that
indeed.
That is so stark.
Oh dear, indeed. Sorry. One more thing. Financial inclusion via the telco model in Kenya, right? Do you know what the numbers are? 82%. That is 8 out of 10 Kenyans has access to financial services. 82%.
Well, definitely.
Yeah. So yeah. All right.
We've done much better with regard to financial inclusion in Kenya. That's the country where they have M-Pesa, right?
Correct.
Doing very well. But I hope you are not going as far in talking about fuel levy as trying to recommend that Nigeria should follow that route.
Doctor, we have to do something.
Well, but let's start with what the Vice President said.
Yes.
About tax to GDP ratio.
Yes.
Well, the major challenge for Nigeria is in widening the tax base.
Yes.
How much point has been made? At 8%, if you compare it with our contemporaries in Africa, the average in Africa is between 15 to 20%.
Double digits.
But the major problem we have in Nigeria is that, look, the average Nigerian is already overtaxed. We have the regime of multiple taxation. It was good, he pointed out in that presentation that last year, the Federal Inland Revenue Service was able to raise, revenue, and that with the transition away from fossil fuel and less dependence on petroleum, crude oil receipts, that Nigeria has to do something in terms of tax collection. So what we need, really, is an efficient tax administration system,
yes,
tax
agreed.
collection system.
Yep.
So I don't think anybody will argue with widening the base, but the formula you adopt is what is important. The second thing that we have, the major challenge with regard to tax administration in Nigeria, is the issue of trust. The average Nigerian, is committed to tax avoidance.
Right.
Tax evasion is a crime, right? Tax avoidance is not a problem. Because of that problem of trust, when you pay the taxes, what do government officials, what do Nigerian leaders do with your tax? And because of that disconnect between the people, you'll find again that the average Nigerian will go to any extent, to find a way to evade, to avoid tax, okay? Now, so as for the point made by the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, yes, he was lamenting. He says that the consumption, we don't exactly know how much we consume, and that this problem has been there for decades, and that it is opaque, it is crazy, and that every solution that has been attempted by the government of Nigeria has failed. Now, that's like an admission of failure on the part of government, on his part. The average Nigerian will tell you that, well, these persons were elected into these positions so that they can solve problems.
Right.
You know, the Minister of State is there to find problems. But, he was lamenting very well in that television footage that was shown. It's not about the lamentation. He himself tried to identify, perhaps, part of the problem. He says the subsidy regime benefits some people, the rich, at the expense of the poor. And the best solution, in his view, is to remove subsidy. But now I hope he's aware of some of the other considerations, that the Nigerian government has pushed forward. And now we're going to borrow 3 trillion. Now the Petroleum Industry Act that was on the table, that was supposed to have been implemented from February, I think, moved to July. Now move further down the line for another 18 months. The considerations are both political and, whatever, as we have discussed on this program. So we would like to hear more in terms of solutions from public officials. Of course, we all know that the consumption figures are opaque and crazy, to quote the minister. Yep. But I thought there was a time they said they had adopted technology to be able to monitor consumption. So the question to ask is, what happened to that? Mm-hmm. Because that was announced with so much fanfare. Yep. And once upon a time in this country, 2 committees were set up, the Imokwede committee, to look at the downstream sector. And it was discovered that most of the people who claim to be importing fuel and who are collecting subsidy, that in fact they are just collecting rent from the Nigerian state. Where are we with that? And why is the NNPC monopoly, still subsisting? That's part of the opaqueness in this sector. So there are concrete things that government can address. And then he's talked about when the refineries will begin to perform at a certain level. We have always had that. We've been hearing that now for how many years? Yes. And one government after the other has not been able to solve the problem. So that some people are even saying, look, sell these refineries as scrap. Exactly. And focus more on the option of either modular refineries or these private refineries. But it's amazing to see that the minister was also suggesting that even with the Dangote refinery coming on stream, if the subsidy is still there, then, of course, it will not help anybody. Yeah. And the Dangote refinery, we're told, is likely to come on stream by September. So are the investors going to be punished because of policy omissions?
They will not agree.
It generally does not inspire a lot of confidence, does it, when our leaders, our government officials sit on TV and wring their hands like the rest of us? It's actually really scary. So I don't really understand what the point of that was, but we need the solutions. Yeah. And the fact is that we do not even know whether it's 50 million liters per day that we're consuming or 100 liters. We have no idea. That is also a massive failing, because these are the basic things. And then this is the sort of conditions that we're now expected to pay more tax. And this is the thing. I've quoted this saying several times, that the only thing certain in life are death and taxes. If you like Marvin Gaye, he adds trouble, death and taxes. But you will, as Dr. Abati said, try to avoid paying taxes. You will try and pay the barest minimum because there's no trust. So what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Is it a case of show us what you do with our taxes, then inspire us to be more civic-minded? Or are the people supposed to shelve their distrust, fork over their hard-earned money,
and hope for the best,
and keep your fingers crossed? I doubt that that is going to be an option, that latter part. It just will not. And this is exactly why there's no confidence in the leaders. There's no confidence that people actually have a clue what they're doing. Even like basics, like how much fuel do we consume? This is the manner of incompetence that we're dealing with here. So it's just really an impossible situation.
And in fact, the minister complaining about not having the right data. Well, data is the major problem, isn't it? Yep. We don't even know how many we are. We don't even know how many Nigerians
This is the thing.
So if you don't know your population, how will you even be able to measure what you consume?
I don't understand this level of self-indictment, not just personally to Timi Silva. It's just across the board. It's not about him. It's across the board.
There was a study, a maize, the Bureau of Statistics, sorry, I know we're out of time. The Bureau of Statistics just recently released a maize consumption data. It was in line with the World Bank and so on. In the reports, they said that we don't know how much maize that we grow and produce and consume. So that's what they had to, I think it was across 12 northern states that they actually had to narrow the consumption data down to. It's incredible. I know. What do we know?
What is the point of view there?
Who am I? It's just
uncertainty on all fronts.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Rosa.
Thank you so much.
For an update on the COVID-19 pandemic, Adeswa Amora is here with us. Good morning, Adeswa.
Good morning, Tundu, and good morning, Dr. Abati. Great to be here again. Well, from the lack of data in Nigeria, let's go to data that is available to us according to the Johns Hopkins University tally on the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, about 13 months after, almost 10 billion vaccine doses have now been administered globally. A milestone, you would say, given the time, but gaps persist in who gets the shots and where they remain available. While some countries have had to incentivize the process to get the shots in the arms of its citizens, others have gone the route of mandatory vaccines, while some have had to combine measures. Well, Quebec in Canada has jettisoned plans to tax the unvaccinated to fund its healthcare system. And 381 million infections have been recorded so far since the start of this pandemic, with at least 5.6 million people losing their lives to this virus. And the fears of the island nation struck by a tsunami and a volcanic eruption, Tonga, has come to pass, with over 5 coronavirus cases now reported. And the island nation of Tonga will be going into a lockdown today. Well, here in Nigeria, the country has recorded about 200 new COVID-19 infections, and thankfully, no COVID-19 related deaths in the past 24 hours. The infections were reported from 8 states as well as the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja. When it comes to vaccination, over 20.5 million doses of vaccines have been administered in Nigeria. Even though the country missed another set target last month, released data shows that between December 21st and January 22nd, the country increased its monthly vaccination by 23%. So far, the highest daily vaccination rate was recorded on the 13th of January this year, where 250,000 eligible persons got vaccinated in one day. You would recall that the Africa CDC is optimistic the continent will meet its target of vaccinating 70% of the population because of signs it's seen in countries such as Nigeria where there's an uptake. So that's good news. Well, as concerns grow over the spread of the Omicron cousin, the WHO held an online briefing about the BA.2 yesterday. The officials said that this subvariant appears to be no different in severity from the original Omicron, which is BA.1. And it says, although it is more transmissible, but it is not more severe. At that briefing, the DG, the Director General, Tedros Ghebreyesus, also warned that it is too early for any country to either declare victory over COVID-19 or to give up attempt to halt the transmission of the virus. He says there's a victory narrative that has taken hold in some countries because of the number of vaccines they've administered. Now, that concern by the WHO DG comes on a day Denmark became the first EU country to lift its domestic COVID-19 curbs despite the record numbers we're seeing coming out of Denmark. This means that an indoor mask mandate, the use of COVID-19 pass for bars, restaurants, and indoor venues, as well as legal obligation to self-isolate if you test positive, have all ended with immediate effect. The government in Denmark says it's because coronavirus is no longer a socially critical sickness. Well, to Africa, where research is underway in South Africa, to be precise, the continent's most affected country, to determine whether coronavirus may have a greater opportunity to develop mutations when it remains in long periods of time in people with a weakened immune system, HIV in particular. Scientists in South Africa think that that may be how the Omicron variant actually originated. And finally, the WHO is warning that the increasing amount of medical waste is endangering public safety as well as the environment. It says billions of syringes and personal protective equipment are adding to huge amounts of hazardous waste from the COVID-19 pandemic. The global health body is recommending improvements such as switching to reusable products because much of the waste being generated during this pandemic are not being disposed properly. Back to you guys.
Well, the major point about this last point about medical COVID waste is that even before COVID, many countries, particularly in low and medium income countries, were dealing with the management of waste. What has happened with COVID is that, well, there's been an increase in terms of syringes that need to be disposed of, personal protective equipment, safety boxes, and all of that. And in many of these countries that did not even have the capacity to dispose of healthcare waste before now, the problem has been compounded. Hence, the WHO is in order to say that, look, countries need to raise the level of waste management in the light of this pandemic, and that they should rely more on reusable, recyclable, or biodegradable, healthcare facilities in order to save the environment and not further extend the challenge. Now, in South Africa, the research by the scientists, well, that's in order. Scientists will continue to ask questions. They will continue to raise questions and stretch the frontier. South Africa has the highest seroprevalence of HIV in Africa. About 8.2 million people, are infected with HIV. So it's not surprising to see that the scientists at the Genomic Center are looking at this connection between COVID-19 and HIV. And the simple point is that people who are immunosuppressed, you use the more appropriate word, weakened immune systems. Whether it is HIV or cancer or any other condition, what scientists have said is that, look, they tend to have more difficulties with COVID because the virus finds a way of staying, within their system. And long after they've even been treated, that could be a problem. And that in itself could encourage the emergence of mutations. So I think that the research question about that connection is something that makes sense. The main point about people, not giving up on the COVID pandemic was made by Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus when he said the virus is dangerous. So who knows what kind of mutation will come up again? Because the trend now is that many countries, both for political reasons and for business reasons, or if you like, economic reasons, are reviewing their, protocols, their guidelines. And Tedros Ghebreyesus and others from WHO are simply saying, no, we shouldn't drop the guard yet. Apart from even taking the vaccine, certain other protocols that are in place should be observed. Finally, Pfizer in the US and BioNTech, its partner, they are asking the Food and Drug Administration to approve a lower dose vaccine for children below the age of, from the age of 5, below 5. And, that's the only category, over 90 million of them in the US who do not have access. But you recall that the UK, early this week, decided to vaccinate, persons within that age range, but persons that have health complications. In Canada, that persons under age 5, the approval has also been given. And there are indications that the US FDA may give that approval. And Pfizer says that the company has already submitted, its application.
Right. I don't know where I'm going to start. I guess I'll start with that warning from Tedros Ghebreyesus, which I think is actually timely. Look at Denmark, like you mentioned, just ripped up their COVID rules. Life has gone back to normal. People are hitting the clubs and partying like it's 1999. Well, if you like Prince, well, partying like it's 2019. And just apart from hospitals and care homes, I believe, you never have to wear masks. You don't have to be subjected to temperature checks. And of course, tourists coming into Denmark, and Norway is the same. And it seems a bit premature if you look at the number of cases, anywhere between 33,000 to 47,000 new cases. But I think the point that they are making is that, yes, they know that there are so many new cases, a lot more new cases because of the Omicron variant and how highly transmissible it is. But the point for countries like Denmark and Norway is that the ICU intensive care cases are falling. Deaths are falling, their hospitals are not overwhelmed. There are so many new cases, but those new cases are mild. So they feel like business as usual. it's time to go back to that. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have New Zealand, which is always talked about, has been extremely conservative, really erring on the side of caution where COVID-19 is concerned. And there was a bit of a storm in a teacup about a pregnant journalist from New Zealand who was trapped in Afghanistan and was almost like giving birth in Afghanistan. She's due in March. And she had to turn to the Taliban, of all people, for help because her country would not let her leave Afghanistan and come home to New Zealand to have her baby because she could not secure a quarantine spot. But there's a happy ending for her and her baby and her family because the deputy prime minister of her country has stepped in and she secured that spot. But that is how strict New Zealand still is. So we have these two complete opposite ends of the spectrum here. Adeswa, which do you think is correct? Where do you stand? I'm putting you on the spot, as always.
It's difficult to say there's a correct and there's a wrong side when it comes to this pandemic. Countries are learning, with almost 3 years into this pandemic, countries are learning to live with this virus because scientists have again told us that, we might have this virus with us. It will become endemic like we've had other viruses. And so what are the steps to start to prepare? I think that's what countries are doing at the moment. However, the WHO is saying it's just too early with the number of cases we are seeing because more infections, although Omicron is milder, more infections will equal more deaths, whether you like it or not, because your entire population is not as healthy to withstand the mild nature of Omicron. So there's no right or wrong about it. It's just common sense and weighing the balance.
Yeah.
I think that's what it is, Tundu. It's difficult to say.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's better to err on the side of caution. Tedros Ghebreyesus, in fact, provided his statistics. He said within 10 weeks of the reporting of the Omicron variant in South Africa, we have had reported to WHO about 90 million cases of infection. And that's more than the total number of infections that we had in the whole of the year 2020. And he made the point that you made that, yes, if it's transmissible at a higher rate, then that could result in deaths. More so, as many of these countries, particularly in the least developing countries, low developing countries, do not have the capacity either to ensure vaccination or to manage, the public challenges that come up. Many of them cannot even make use of vaccines that are made available. It will be foolhardy for any of such countries to abandon, the advice being given by WHO. Thank you.
Well, they're done with COVID, but is COVID done with them? Thank you, Adeswa.